exciting. She's set up a great presentation for us today. And then after the presentation, we'll have the options for people in the audience to send in questions. But I've also got a few questions lined up as well. And of course, this is being recorded and it is going up on a live stream. So if you do want to keep your cameras off, that's completely fine. But yeah, Gemma, if you want to just take it away.
Yeah, thanks very much, Tom. So as Tom said, I'll be available for questions at the end. Good to hear that you've got some prepped for me, and so I'll make sure we leave plenty of time for that. So I'll just go over to one of the most used phrases of 2020, which is I'll just share my screen. Can you all see that? All good? Great. Okay, so a little bit of intro to myself. So I'm currently Operations Director at Engage Digital Partners, which is a digital media agency working with sports brands. I'll tell you a little bit. I'll show you a little bit more about what we do coming up. But we work with rights holders, people like World Rugby, Pro 14, the ICC, to deliver digital content and strategy. So I work less on the journalism side now and more in project management, HR and finance. But what is at the core of that is planning how we deliver for sports brands and how we deliver sports content. So lots of shoot planning, general problem solving and reacting to breaking news for our clients. So we've got offices in London, where I am, Melbourne and Bangalore. But as you can see, I'm currently working from my spare bedroom, which I have been for the last 10 months. So whilst we do have an office in London that I can actually see outside of my bedroom window, we've got people working remotely for us in all parts of the country, and also in the same in Australia and India. We've got around 100 full-time staff and 100 million digital subscribers currently under our management. And actually what I'm going to do now is just take it off full screen to just show you a little bit more about what it is we do. So that just gives you a little bit of an insight into what it is we do. I'm not sure how much of the sound you got there, because I got a notification halfway through saying I've been muted. So I'm not sure if you actually got that, but hopefully it gives you an insight into some of the brands that we work with, some of the things that we cover. So here's a little snapshot of kind of brands that we're working with. We're currently doing a production and strategy project with Real Madrid. We work with World Horse Racing, which is an entity we helped set up. You saw some clips there from some of the work we do in India. We work with Arsenal and Chelsea and Major League Baseball to build their audiences in that region. And one that's not on there that we've recently just started working with is the International Cricket Council, and we're doing all of their social and web output at the moment. So that's kind of web articles, live cricket match updates, video content, graphic content. So what's Life at Engage like? Well, it's definitely really well set up for people just like you. We kind of pride ourselves on our average age being just under 30, and myself and a lot of the other directors definitely bring that age, that average up. It's really sociable place to work, current circumstances being the exception to that. We kind of do a lot of kind of internal training and development, but one of the things that we've really tried to do during lockdown in particular, like this Friday just gone, because it's the last Friday of the month, at 4:00 we held a virtual beer o'clock, where we encouraged everyone to come onto Zoom with a glass of wine or beer or soft drink for those that don't drink, and we just showed the best of the work from across the company, because I think one thing that's been quite difficult during lockdown is obviously seeing what all your colleagues are up to. So that was our opportunity to showcase some of the things that we've been working on. And in normal circumstances, obviously lots of socials, but also lots of actual sports participation as well. Play football, play baseball. So these are just a bit of snapshot of what Life at Engage is like outside of a global pandemic. Filming globally, covering things like the Goodwood Revival, the Melbourne Cup, MLB. So one of the things that really kind of struck me when I was at university and in your position was, I knew I wanted to work in sports media, and I had sports journalists in my head and did everything to kind of get myself on the path to be able to go and do that. But once I started work in sports media, what really struck me was the kind of list of available things to you. And I think if you've got a passion for media, a passion for sport, don't necessarily just think I have to be a newspaper writer or I have to be on screen if I'm working in television. This just shows some of the great scope of roles that you could be involved in with having sports journalism at the kind of key heart of what it is that you do. You can use those skills to work in marketing and PR, sales and sponsorship, to work on a very technical side. You might be a researcher, you might be in front of the camera, you might be a newspaper writer, or you might be a social media manager. There is such scope for taking that skill set and being able to apply it to so many different positions. So what did I do? So start early is my biggest tip possible for any of you wanting to get into this industry. I did loads of work experience. Honestly, my parents every summer holidays were like, are you going to earn some money or are you going back to work for free at all of these places? But it definitely paid off in the end. I worked in local papers, local radio, local BBC. While I was at Newcastle University, I was sports editor of the Courier. So I wrote for the paper in my first year, was sports editor for my second and third year. And then I went on to be the editor, which for a lot of you will be a full-time sabbatical position, which it was for me. I know it's not for all universities, but student journalism was kind of really at the heart of my career journey. After I'd been editor of the Courier, I went on to do a postgrad in broadcast journalism at the University of Central Lancashire. And it was there that I got a placement at Sky News as part of my course. And that was kind of what I look back on now as my kind of like pivotal moment for dictating the early parts of my career. Because I got on really well with the sports editor there, who said that they'd give me freelance shifts. But what's interesting, speaking to you guys who are obviously northern based at the moment, you will probably be in a similar position to me, where I said, I can't move to London without the commitment of a full-time job. And actually people that were based in London or had family that was based in London had a bit of an advantage over me, where they could take freelance shifts. I mean, it might be something that comes up in your questions at the end, but this kind of virtual and remote working world might play into your hands a little bit more now. But I basically had the kind of decision of what did I want to do. And then I just got really lucky that a permanent role came up at Sky Sports News just after I'd done my placement at Sky News, and the sports editor there recommended me. I got the job and never looked back. So I was there for 7 years and kind of worked my way up. When I left Sky, I joined Engage in 2017. Really felt like I wanted to do something slightly different, and I'll go into that a little bit more further into this presentation. But decided to have a little bit of a change and go to more the management side of things. So my role now covers all operations. So what was life at Sky Sports News like? It's ironic that my kind of choice of image there is me working a Sky deadline day, because that's what it is today. And my phone keeps going off with notifications of what's going on in the Sky Sports studio today. But my first job was writing the breaking news ticker. I moved on to do kind of the text headlines, which for those of you that watch Sky Sports News, it's the tabs at the bottom that'll say kind of like Championship, League One, League Two, golf, cricket. Then progressed to do more video editing and script writing, then gallery producing, which is when you're kind of like in the presenter's ear when there's breaking news, deciding what's the next thing coming up. All of that kind of meant 8 years worth of different roles covering transfer deadline day. But kind of like what I look back on is my highlights at Sky were kind of 5 years of being the dedicated England football producer, where I got to travel the world watching England, which seems like a distant memory these days, doesn't it, getting on a plane? And that was kind of like where my kind of key journalism was really put to the test, because we were competing against other TV, radio and newspapers to get the best stories and get it first. So as I said, just a few of my kind of highlights here, doing pitch side lives, did a lot of kind of things on screen for social, lots of Facebook lives, things like that. And going to tournaments in Brazil and France. Didn't just do football, did a lot of rugby, did a lot of cricket as well. But yeah, England was definitely my highlight. So how have I gone from being a producer who was kind of writing interview questions and being in front of the camera sometimes and script writing and being at the heart of chasing those stories to now what I'm doing? Well, having transferable skills was basically at the forefront of that. So I've moved from producing to production management and operations, but ultimately being accurate, being first, being reliable is all the key of both of those roles. So I've gone from hosting and producing live to making sure that they're technically correct. And ultimately, for both of those positions, you have to be super organized. But what we always have to remember is that the output of both is great stories and great content and making something that people want to watch. So it's having the mindset that you can either be the person that's doing the content from the point of view of what am I saying and what is going out there, but actually what has to happen to get that to our phones, to our TV screens. But I have also learnt lots of new skills, things like data analytics. So we do a lot of work with our clients to look at what people are following, what people are watching, what people are reacting to. And at heart of kind of the things that we make is making sure that we're making something that people actually want to see. Publishing and audience development techniques and kind of appreciation of multi-skilled employees. And this is something that I definitely advise you guys, is that even when I was training like 15 years ago, God, is it that long? Yeah, 15 years ago, I could specifically say, I want to do this. And I learned to be a broadcast journalist and learned specific skills for that. But actually, now people that we're employing, we want to see that they can do a bit of everything. So our producers film, edit, plan, write questions, ask questions. So being multi-skilled is definitely a thing of the future. So I got asked to do a presentation before Christmas at Bath University that was about women in sport. So a slightly different kind of approach to this. And one of the things that they asked me to talk about were challenges I'd faced in my career. And I thought, actually, that's probably quite an interesting thing to talk to you guys about, because it's not just about being a woman in sport, kind of what are the challenges that I face, because ultimately you learn from every challenge that you face. So look, the first one is definitely that working in sport is a male dominated industry. And I think if some of you are women trying to go into sport now, you'll be in such a better position than I was kind of 10, 15 years ago, where I'd turn up to press conferences and very often be the only woman at some events. And then likewise, sometimes I find myself being put into certain situations because being a woman was an advantage, because they needed to kind of tick the box of a female covering something. Other challenges, like I'm sure you guys working in student media definitely know the importance of hitting a deadline. Like if I think of my career days at Newcastle, Thursday nights in the office were like when we would pull all-nighters to get that paper out. And there is nothing to prepare you any better for what it is like in the real world than having to pull those all-nighters and making sure you hit a deadline. And I'm certainly not the first person to tell you that this is not a 9 till 5 role. What I do now is slightly more 9 till 5 because that is the kind of decision that I chose to make. But I still work in sport. I still get calls from clients at the weekends and at different hours. Like if you're going into sport and if you're going into journalism, do not expect to work Monday to Friday and be able to attend every birthday dinner that you want to attend throughout the week. But on the flip side of that, I'd say that my friends were always really intrigued to hear what I was up to at work, whereas those that worked in more 9 till 5 never really want to talk about work outside of that environment because they don't find it as exciting. And I guess one of the challenges that I've encountered whilst working for a digital agency is the expectations of the client versus reality. There's a meme that goes around that is kind of client budget versus client expectation, that basically shows that a client might think because they're paying you a few hundred or a few £1,000s, that means they're going to get a Netflix style documentary for the small budget that you're paying you. So kind of overcoming things like that was certainly a challenge. So the one I did before Christmas also kind of took those challenges to look at advice that I would give to people looking to get into this sort of career. And my first piece of advice is do it, definitely do it. But it's not without those challenges. One of the things that I found really helped me was having a niche or a selling point to give you the edge. So look, when I was getting into the industry, and it'll be exactly the same now, I'm afraid you're going to have to get used to the fact that there are thousands of people that want to be sports journalists. There are thousands of people that know quite a lot about Premier League football and they wouldn't mind working for Sky Sports News. But I remember being in my interview with Sky Sports News and me referencing that I really liked rugby league. I'm from Wigan, if you haven't detected from the accent yet. And the guy that was interviewing me kind of really challenged me on that, the show, just to test out that I wasn't just saying I liked it. And actually, I left that interview knowing that was the great turning point, because they spotted that I had something different to offer to lots of other candidates that came in there talking about how much they love football and cricket. Well, because actually, once I started work there, I realised that there were maybe like 2% of the employees that knew what they were talking about, but actually the amount of audience that love rugby league and want accurate and exciting Super League content was actually quite big. And I needed to be able to be a person that could take that ratio and make sure that we were delivering to that audience. So always think about something that you might like or know about that other people don't. And as I mentioned earlier, kind of work experience is really crucial. It's not just about what you learn there, and it's the interpretation of what that looks like on your CV. Part of my role now is hiring, and when I see applications come through, I don't want to see someone that's just literally have one job. I want to know that they've had experiences of different places and actually going and doing the unpaid work experience, or paid in some respects. I'm actually a big advocate for people paying us now to do those placements if they can. It just shows how passionate you are about getting into the industry, and unfortunately it is quite a crowded market. Lots of people want to do it, so showing you're committed really helps. As I've already said, again, get involved in student media. It is really great preparation because it is real. And yes, the work experience going to a local newspaper or a local radio station is great, but generally you're only going to witness what's being done there. In student media, you're doing it, you're learning from your mistakes. And definitely be prepared to do the unglamorous roles and start at the bottom. I've been a runner on God knows how many productions, and yeah, it's really frustrating to be getting presenters cups of teas and printing scripts because you think, I've got a degree, and in some cases I've got a postgrad, and I've done all of this already. But everyone has to start somewhere, and it's actually about how much that reflects well on you to be able to be the person that puts in the hard work. And big advocate of networking. So there's nothing like meeting in person. I've said this so many times about just follow up with people that you meet. I actually learned this tip about a year ago that I keep meaning to put in this presentation, actually, which just occurred to me. In the kind of more old school days of networking, where it wasn't necessarily, where it's even pre-email. I'm not saying that I'm pre-email, this is a story from someone that was pre-email. They used to collect business cards, and on the back of that business card would write down a fact about that person that they'd remembered. And it might be that they were having a baby, or it might be that they really, really loved, or they supported Surrey cricket, or just something that they could hook a network with them. And the equivalent now would be sending an occasional email. But this person used to write to all of their kind of key networking people kind of once every 6 months, and would ask questions like, how's your daughter, or did you see such thing at the cricket? And because those people would know that you actually remembered them as individuals. So the equivalent now is if you meet someone, following that up over email or over a direct message or what have you, because actually you might not need that person for something in particular. But if you don't get in touch with them until you need them for something, they're less likely to respond to you. So I'd say, oh, look, you're all kind of heeding that advice now by attending this event. But at the moment, there are some really great virtual gatherings going on. So go and attend them. Go and see who you hear from that you quite like and that you might want to follow up with. And then when things start up again, definitely get into the realms of meeting in person. And if there is something, if you are, for instance, a woman wanting to get into football, there is literally an organisation called Women in Football that do training exercises that at the moment are being held over Zoom, do virtual gatherings, just research things like that. What is there that you can get involved in? You're all obviously already doing it through being involved with the SPA. What else exists that you can kind of tap into? I'd definitely say learn different skills. As I said, being multi-skilled will really help you. And don't be afraid of change. I think when I kind of came to the point where I was looking at whether I should stay at Sky or leave Sky, go into something new, you think when you start somewhere, you think you're going to be there forever. There is no shame in changing, because actually it keeps you on your toes, you learn new skills. Don't be afraid to change, which kind of leads on to the next point of never stop learning, never think that you are the finished article. When you land your first job, it'll be such a moment of achievement, but never think that means you've made it, because there's always something new to learn and always something changing in the industry. And finally, being memorable might seem like quite a broad piece of advice, but it really links back to the networking thing. When I was leaving Sky, I kind of got in touch or heard from, really randomly, people that I was sports editor at the Courier with, who said, oh, I've heard there's loads of changes at Sky. Are you thinking of moving on? Because I think you'd be really great at this. And actually, even though I hadn't spoken to that person in 7 or 8 years, they got in touch with me to discuss a job opportunity. And I think if you can just stick in people's memory and be good at what you do at every point in life, then people will remember you when the time comes. And that is what I've got for you. And now I'm going to pass it over to the floor for any questions from you guys. Sorry for just chatting at you non-stop for 25 minutes.
No, that was really great. Thank you very much for that. So I have a few questions lined up here, but while I'm going through them, if anyone in the audience wants to pop their hand up, there should be an option, if you click more, to put your hand in the air, and then we can ask you to unmute, and then you can give us your questions. But I suppose I'll just start with the little list that I've got at the moment. So to start us off, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received in your career? I know you've obviously given us quite a lot of advice in that last slide, but if you can think of one instant where someone's given you something which really stuck in your head, I wonder if you want to maybe share it with the audience.
Yeah, that's a really great question. There's no one piece that sticks out. I've obviously just remembered that business card thing that you told me, that I've just told you, sorry. Definitely the kind of being memorable. I think if I think back to like the first lot of work experience that I did, I was advised to keep going with those things. And I think you learn something new from every process that you go through, and every bit of work experience led me on to the next, and I learned something at every single one. And I think quite a defining point for me was when I was applying for my postgrad, I couldn't decide between newspapers and broadcast, and I actually called one of the old newspaper editors that I'd done work experience for, because I thought the broadcast guys are obviously going to tell me to do broadcast, but are the newspaper guys going to tell me to do newspapers? And this was like a pre-Twitter kind of era as well. And he advised me to kind of always move with the times, and actually learning skills in broadcast was probably going to be what was most helpful to me, which is why I went down that path. And then something that is like that I've learned a little bit, even like last week, I had my annual appraisal with my boss, who is like the most super ambitious person. He's the CEO of the company. He builds it from nothing. So when I do my annual review with him, his targets for me, I end up leaving the call going, how am I meant to do that? He thinks we're as big as Sky, but we've got 100 employees and I'm in charge of all operations. Like at Sky, they've got a team of hundreds doing this. And I spoke to our finance director about it and like asked for a bit of advice. And actually she gave me some really good advice about how to manage up, and that actually sometimes you have to be able to say no and ask for clarity, and never be afraid to ask questions about what someone, for an explanation of what someone is genuinely asking of you. And I guess she's also taught me a lot about managing people and my expectations of some of my team. And she said she literally just made this up on the spot last week, but she was like, really, you shouldn't really manage someone that earns any less than 2/3 of what you do, because the skills gap is too big. So actually always be really realistic to what you're asking people to do.
Great, good advice. And just picking up on one of the things you mentioned then, when you mentioned that you used your old newspaper editor, which you've done some work with, and also in your presentation you mentioned starting early in the industry. In this current COVID climate, how would you recommend ways in which you could start early when you can't physically go to newspapers and ask if you can do work there and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I really, really sympathise for you guys. I think, look, every single person has been impacted by COVID in a different way. Like, part of my job was literally coming up with a business continuity plan and a strategy for how Engage could still operate under COVID. Like, we've all been completely impacted by it. And we did run a work experience scheme, which we've got every intention of restarting, but we just don't think it's viable for people to do work experience virtually. So definitely do as much, like use this time to do as many online tutorials as you possibly can, and like learn as many different skills as you can. And it might be that actually you use that to blog about something or to do your own content about something, because people generally do have a little bit more time on their hands because we've obviously got nothing sociable to be doing. So kind of self-teaching, I think, is quite important. And actually, if you kind of end up blogging, it goes back to the point I made about having a niche. If you end up blogging or tweeting or making content for a certain thing that can get spotted by people, definitely share lots of content. And kind of one of the things that we do for our clients is strategy around how more people can see their content. Well, if you're making something, make sure you're reaching out to relevant people that might want to read it, or relevant people that you might be able to work with.
Fantastic. Another question I had linking in, because obviously it's funny you mentioned, because I am currently the head of sport at the Courier, so obviously we've had similar experiences in that respect. And it's coming to the point where I'm going to graduate soon. I'm looking at my CV and I'm thinking, what elements of my experience at the Courier could I put in that CV to make me more marketable and more attractive to future employers? So that's what I'd like to ask you. How did you personally take your student journalism experience and translate that into your CV?
Well, do you know what's interesting is that I think the older you get and the more roles you do, you delete things from the bottom of your CV. So a lot of the work experience that I've done is not on there anymore, but the career is, because I think you make really great life skills there. So the things that I have still got on my CV, even though it was when I was 21 and I'm now 34, managing a team. I managed a budget as the editor, which obviously I knew, well, you might do now, actually. Things might have changed. You might have had, you might have a budget now. Definitely the kind of management of deadlines, and making sure that people are delivering. And have you had to manage anyone by giving kind of negative feedback as well? And I guess kind of one of the things that I like really tried to do as a sports editor was speak to lots of different clubs. So you weren't just covering like the rugby or the football or whatever, like main the netball, like whatever the main sports are. So I think kind of the networking and finding stories, like if you've got something in particular that you've done that you think has got like really great reaction, and obviously you've got a better metric for measuring reaction than I have now because your stuff goes online, so you can see if there is engagement from that. Like, don't be afraid to kind of highlight if there's something that's had really particularly great uptake.
Fantastic. And speaking about that, because like you said, you're kind of constantly always hustling, and it's very difficult to find this work-life balance when it's not, journalism isn't a 9 to 5 job. Mm-hmm. So how do you ensure personally that you don't get consumed by your work and you have a healthy work-life balance?
Yeah, I've just seen that question pop up in the chat there. It's actually something that's really hard at the moment, because I work in my spare room and then I just walk into my living room and all my emails are on my phone and I see things flash up. It is really hard to do. I'd actually say that kind of make sure that in your 20s is when you just say yes to everything. So you might not have the healthiest work-life balance in your 20s, but like go and experience the world if we can go and do that again. And I think kind of how I do that now is I just find like exercise is really important. So make sure that I exercise before work. One of the things that I've like put into my lockdown routine is after this call, I'm just going to go out for a walk. And even if I take work calls on that walk, getting some fresh air is just super important for us mentally, to be able to respond to kind of what we're going through now. I think what I did when I was at Sky is I was just quite a good planner. So whilst you worked in breaking news and you knew if there was a big story, you would have to drop everything. Things that you can plan is when I was covering England, I knew that I would have to go away at certain periods and there'll be certain matches that I had to target. Well, you kind of learn when might be slightly quieter. And that's when it's really important that you do schedule that time with your friends and family. Because if you know that it's going to be a little bit quieter, like take advantage of it.
Perfect. And then I've got a couple more questions, but again, if anyone has anything in the chat, be sure to fire away. I just thought it might be a bit fun to ask what the most surreal moment of your career has been, because obviously you've got to experience a lot of great sporting events. You got to meet some amazing sports people. Was there one particular moment when you just stood there thinking, how did I end up here? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a really great question because there's so many. One that like I still refer back to is when I say that I like covered cricket, I did most of my coverage of cricket from the office, but the Ashes series here in 2015, I think it was, literally our other cricket producers couldn't make one day, and it ended up being, and so I had to go and cover this test up at Trent Bridge. Just 1 second, sorry. Sorry about that. Despite the fact I was saying I was on camera, my fiance must have come in and get something. So yeah, I hadn't covered much, hadn't covered any cricket like out in the field. And then the first day that I did ended up being a day, I don't know how many of you kind of follow cricket, but a day that Stuart Broad took 8 wickets and we bowled out the Aussies for 50 yards in one morning. And I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, what have I witnessed? What have I seen here? And I'd say going to Brazil for the World Cup, definitely a kind of pinch me moment that I'd kind of been building up to it. I'd been covering England for 2 years before that point. And even though I knew I'd be likely to go, when I got asked the question and got told, can you go? That was amazing. I remember being at the first match, just thinking, wow.
Amazing. It's something which I could only wish to be able to take part in, going to a World Cup and getting to cover your own country. I'm just wondering, just for that, were you able to attend like because obviously you represent England, were you able to attend other matches as well, like like that famous Germany-Brazil game where they lost 7-1? Were you able to make it to that?
No. So I was covering England, and
right.
That was actually the worst bit about it. That was the worst World Cup ever. Yeah. And they went out at the group stages, and work rang me and said, we're moving your flight to come home. And I was absolutely devastated. But what they were really good about was, I said, well, I'm owed loads of time off in lieu because I've worked every day straight for the last 6 weeks. If I pay to stay here, accommodation wise, can I stay on holiday? So they did let me do that. So I stayed out, but didn't get to go to those. But then I covered the Euros in France a couple of years later, and obviously it's much closer to home, but they actually made the call, no, we want the core crews to stay out there, which was great because then I ended up getting switched to cover Wales, who made it to the semi-final, and did get to go to that final as well. So yeah, Brazil wasn't the kind of best experience, someone on the pitch kind of thing, and I'd left Sky by the time England actually had a really good World Cup in Russia. And I was like, are you kidding me? One of the reasons I decided to leave was I've had 5 years of this. Russia, I do not want to go there. I went for the initial draws. So I was like, I've done it. I do not want to go to a tournament in Russia. And then obviously they did really well.
Well, perhaps speaking about the opposite of not doing very well, I think using my detective work, I worked out that you're a Wigan fan. So I just thought I'd quickly ask you, how do you think Wigan will do this season? Because I'm not really a League One fan, but I've just seen that they're relatively far down the table. So.
We are. So for those of you that know a bit about football, we got into a little bit of financial trouble, shall we say, last year. And God, as if it wasn't hard enough navigating a global pandemic, my football team went into administration and got relegated. So yeah, it wasn't the best of years. Honestly, if we stay up this year, I will take that as total success. Last year was like really heartbreaking. Basically, when we came back from lockdown and matches restarted, we were like a point above the relegation zone, and we just went on the most ridiculous run. It was amazing. Like the only team we lost to were Brentford, who ended up finishing third, and obviously we're in the playoff final. And we basically had to finish. We would have stayed. We basically got given a 12-point deduction for going into administration, and we were like a point away from still staying up despite that, because of the run they went on. Unfortunately, went down and lost our appeal against the points deduction and had to sell literally every player. I look at the starting lineup now every week. I'm like, who are they? And it's because we're having to play like our youth team. But yeah, if we stay up, it'll be success. And our takeover collapsed a few weeks ago, but we're in talks with new people, and hopefully they'll inject a little bit of cash to just ensure we stay in the division.
Right. Well, fingers crossed for Wigan at the moment then.
Thank you.
And just leading on to, I think it'll be the final question. Of course, if anyone has any further questions, your Twitter is free for anyone to just hurl questions away.
Definitely. Of
Fantastic.
course, yeah. More than happy to answer questions. Because I think you always kind of like remember people that helped you in this instance as well. And I don't know whether you've been told this from the Courier, but there was a Courier editor in the 70s who ended up going on to be the creator of Loose Women and the Jeremy Kyle Show. So she's like now retired. She's like obviously 30 years older than me. But she came and did a guest speaker spot at Newcastle, and I was there, and like I kind of like followed up with her, and she kept trying to get me in with ITV Sport to get me some work experience, and her contact there just wasn't responding, and she was like really frustrated. In the end, she was like, I'm really sorry, but do you want to come and do a week on This Morning with us instead? So I came down to London and did a week as a runner on This Morning that she helped me with. So yeah, I think it's really important to kind of use connections of people that you know have had shared experiences with you.
Well, I mean, the final question I was going to ask is, do you have any closing words for people in the audience? But I think that was quite apt.
Good.
I think that was quite well put. Yeah. So obviously, thank you very, very much for taking time out your busy schedule to host this session today. So this was our first of 4 sessions. So we have one coming up at 2:00 today with Jordan Ollerman talking about the North-South divide and how to have a successful career in the business without having to commute all the way down to London. But again, Gemma, thank you very, very much for joining us. That was a very, very insightful session.
No problem. I've just seen actually that Jake just asked another question about who's been my biggest inspiration during my career.
Okay.
And actually, I was just like, I've not got an answer to that, so I'm not sure if I'm going to say anything. But I think it kind of changes as you go. But actually, my one, when I was like really young, so basically I decided I wanted to do this line of work when I was like 13, 14. And actually my inspirational person that I looked up to then was Gabby Logan. And I think there's some really, really great inspirational people working in the media at the moment. And I think I'd always look to somebody who you have something in common with. So for me, that was because it was a woman who wasn't the traditional Sky Sports news girl that people could accuse of only being put in that position because of how they looked. But I must say, having then gone on to work there, that's not always the case, by the way. So actually, for people coming into the media now, I'd actually say that someone like Alex Scott is, even though she's a professional that's turned into a pundit, like she's a really great person to look up to.
Fantastic. Thank you for that late minute question, Jake. So yeah, I'll just do that bit again. So thank you very, very much, Gemma, for coming on for this hour. It's been fantastic. Again, do you want to just quickly say your Twitter handle, just in case anyone wants to drop you any further messages? Or
Oh, good. Yeah, Twitter handle is at Gem_Davis.
Fantastic. Well, you have a lovely day, Gemma. And again, thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks, guys. No problem at all. And good luck in your careers.
Amazing.
Thanks.
See you guys
Bye.
later.